Check Podcasts. Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and this is Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from the podcasting studios at the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. I would like to, as always, acknowledge that I live and work in the unceded ancestral territory of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. This Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union. Okay, I'm going to play a little game here. I'm going to give you three names. You have to tell me what these people all have in common, okay? Terry Fox, Rick Hansen, Senator Nancy Green Rain. Okay, so you're thinking, all right, well, they're all from BC. They're all athletes. They all made a difference. But you know what else? All three of them are in the British Columbia Sports Hall of Fame. And the Sports Hall of Fame has an event coming up later this year here in Victoria. We're going to talk about the whole Hall of Fame and what it's all about with three people today. Michelle Kitchen is with us. She is the CEO of the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Michelle, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having us on the show.
Thanks for being here. Jason Beck is the curator of the Sports Hall of Fame. Jason, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having us on, Bruce.
You bet. And Tom Mayennecht is with us, too. He is the board chair of the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Tom, how are you?
Bruce, always a pleasure. Great to be part of Chamber Chats. It's certainly a big time to be promoting sport history in Victoria and Vancouver Island.
Yeah. So, Tom, tell me about the history of the Hall of Fame. When was this all established? When did this start?
Well, a visionary by the name of Eric Whitehead was the one recognized for founding the BC Sports Hall of Fame. That was back in 1966. Certainly, to some of the old school baby boomers, he's recognized as a former sports editor and columnist with the province newspaper. But he was so much more than that. He had an absolute passion for not only the power of sport, but the power of sport history. And certainly he set in motion all of the things that were involved in establishing the BC Sports Hall of Fame nearly 60 years ago. Of course, that milestone is coming up. Certainly fast forward to Jason Beck, following the footsteps of Eric Whitehead as our first curator. It was a completely different setting. Pacific National Exhibition at the PNE. And I know that Jason can fill in some of the blanks because that was a pretty special time in sport. Eric Whitehead was the visionary who really put it in play.
There's some wonderful stories we're going to hear today in this chamber chat too. But Michelle, without this being an overly obvious question, what is the purpose of a Sports Hall of Fame?
Well, the Hall of Fame is all about honoring the past and inspiring the future. And what I mean by that is an organization that really focuses on celebrating sport history, sport culture, and all those that have contributed to advancing sport in the province of BC. And at the same time as honoring the past, it's all about inspiring youth. It's inspiring the next generation to believe in sport, to have goals that they can aspire to, and to be the best people that they can absolutely be. So as I said, it's about honoring the past and inspiring the future. It's a phenomenal organization.
Yeah, well, I'm a Chamber of Commerce. I'm a nonprofit. You're a nonprofit. So the question I think a lot of people always say is, how are you funded? Where does the money come from to make this happen?
Very good question. Well, we have visitors that are visiting our hall every single day. So tourists and locals that come and see the hall and explore our wonderful exhibits. But at the same time, we're funded by sponsors who donate to our organization. They believe in what we do and they want to be a part of it. We also have some great support from the government constituents with some grants. And every individual across the province can contribute as an individual donor as well. So various sources of funding. And, we're just happy that people join our family and our community and support the efforts that we do.
Jason, you're the curator of all of this. Tell me about the collection. Tell me about the exhibits. Tell me about what's included in that, sort of a profile of the whole Hall of Fame.
Yeah, we have a massive collection, one of the largest sport-specific collections in Canada. Over 27,000 artifacts to date, and that's constantly growing. We're always collecting more. Hundreds of thousands of photographs and documents and other audiovisual materials. We've got 15 public galleries that visitors can explore. Everything from our Hall of Champions, which we update annually with material from our new inductees to our Indigenous Sport Gallery, which we just opened just about 5 years ago. It tells the story of Indigenous athletes and sport leaders, but everything in between. A gallery on Terry Fox and items from him, and a gallery on Greg Moore, the IndyCar driver, and so items as large as Greg's IndyCar that he raced to his first victory, and as small as a golf tee or a pin, everything in between.
So is that stuff you go out and find, or do people offer it up to you, or is it probably a combination of both, right?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. We're constantly seeking new items from our new honored members and from events that take place. So we're always collecting, and then people come to us. Somebody's cleaning out their garage or their attic, or and finds something. So I get calls all the time. I never say no, because I never know what's going to be out there, and found some pretty remarkable treasures in basements and attics around BC.
Yeah, we're going to get back to in a couple of minutes and tell some of the stories about these people that are in there too. But I want to talk about some of the programs affiliated. Michelle, what's 100 Ravens?
Oh, 100 Ravens was instituted when we opened up the Indigenous Sport Gallery, and it's made up of some wonderful individuals who really wanted to support what we were doing from recognizing the Indigenous sport culture. And these individuals believe in the power of sport and believe in getting those stories of Indigenous sport athletes and coaches and builders into the hands of youth. So these 100 Ravens, we're not quite at 100 yet, but they represent the meaning of the program. These Ravens have donated and contributed to help us give Indigenous youth access to the Indigenous Sport Gallery and all of the resources and the stories and the artifacts and collections data that we have. And we take that to the Indigenous youth through our Hero in You program, which is a free educational support program, whereby we go into schools with some of our ambassadors who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame, athletes, coaches, builders, and we inspire the youth to get interested in these stories that cover, sport, culture, and how those individuals have contributed to the communities of BC. So it's a very important program. We are celebrating the 5th anniversary, as Jason just mentioned, of the Indigenous Sport Gallery in September, and we're going to be recognizing and honoring the donations and the efforts and the support that the 100 Ravens have given thus far and will continue to give as we move forward.
And all of us in our lives have had sports heroes. We have something called the Hero in You. What's that?
The Hero in You is that educational program that I spoke of, and it's a free program that we offer to the educational system. The schools and the teachers are given access to resources and tools. We actually create these wonderful curriculum lessons that are focused on every aspect of sport. Some of them are through individual stories, like Terry Fox, for example. We have a very robust curriculum that is offered through the Hero in You program that is taken into classrooms. There's 5 lessons on the journey of Terry Fox, how he contributed to the country, the community, and as an individual, his Métis culture, which is celebrated and recognized through a lesson. So that's the Hero in You program, and it's province-wide, and we spend a lot of time getting out into the communities and speaking to the schools and making sure that the youth are wanting to be a part of the program and putting the resources into the hands of the teachers so that they can incorporate it into their curriculum.
Okay, next up, what we're going to do is we're going to start to tell you about some of the people that are in the BC Sports Hall of Fame, some amazing stories we'll talk about next. On Chamber Chats today, we're talking about the British Columbia Sports Hall of Fame with 3 people. Michelle Kitchen is the CEO of the Sports Hall of Fame. Jason Beck is the curator, who's going to tell us some stories in a second. And Tom Mayonek is the board chair of the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Tom, you got to think that there's this enormous cohort of Vancouver Canucks in the Sports Hall of Fame, right? That's who comes to mind first, almost.
Certainly the Vancouver Canucks as the biggest franchise, not only in British Columbia, but in Western Canada. They've had a big set of spotlights, including, of course, most recently, Kirk McLean, the Sedin twins, Henrik and Daniel, Trevor Linden, Stan Smeal. The list goes on. They certainly are a big part of the Hall. But the Hall's recognition of the Canucks and the National Hockey League and professional hockey, goes well past that, as Jason can also share with us. You've got the Victoria Cougars, very much part of the real fabric of the BC Sports Hall of Fame, because back in 1925, that was the last time a BC-based team won the Stanley Cup. Of course, the Vancouver Millionaires did so in 1916, just a few years before that. But that's how long the gap is. The Canucks have been around 50 plus years now, certainly looking forward to that first ever Stanley Cup. But the accomplishments of the Victoria Cougars, the Vancouver Millionaires, and of course the Canucks in their 1982 Stanley Cup run and the 1994 Stanley Cup final run, those are very much among the defining moments in BC sport history.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Michelle and Tom, take a bit of a break. Jason and I are going to chat about some stuff. So, Jason, there's the obvious and there's the really cool stories that we may not know about. Tell me about the 1933 Chinese students.
Yeah, it's a great story. Most people have never even heard of the team. They were a men's soccer team based in Vancouver, and this is a time when there's some pretty significant racism for anyone of Asian heritage. But this team was so good, led by their striker Queenie Yip, that they really started to gain some respect amongst the Vancouver public, and they were probably the best team in BC in 1933. They won the Mainland Cup, which at that time was a representative of the BC Championship. We discovered that Mainland Cup; it had been lost for about 60 years. It was, you were talking earlier about how artifacts come to us. That was, someone found that in their father's garage. He was using it as a planter. This was the BC Championship trophy that Chinese students won. Chinatown in Vancouver just went wild. It was like basically a day off celebration, firecrackers being set off, dim sum being eaten everywhere. It was a huge day for the Chinese community.
More details on that on the website, of course. Now, tell me about the 1900 to 1918 Rossland women's ice hockey team.
I love this story because people will see, there's this fantastic photo of the Nelson ladies. They're in this old wooden arena and they're wearing ankle length dresses on skates, those literally were their uniforms at that time. In fact, they were known for these really elaborate uniforms with gold scarves that they play in, but they were shouldn't be fooled by the dresses. These women could really play hockey. They won 5 BC championships. They were the first BC women's champions. They went essentially undefeated in competitive play for 18 years, which, regardless of the level you're playing at, is almost unheard of. So, like real pioneers for the sport, not just for women, but for all of BC.
A woman named Marnie Abbott was involved in a sport activity inspired by one of the other Hall of Famers, but then an accident put her into another sports category. So tell me about Marnie Abbott.
Yeah, Marnie is one of Canada's greatest wheelchair basketball players, multiple-time Paralympic gold medalist, and was really the leader of the team when Canada was just a real dynasty in the sport worldwide. She was kind of the leader of the team, the captain. She's back involved now. She's actually coaching the women's national team once again, and is kind of regarded as one of the legends in the sport, and really one of the nicest people you ever meet. And her husband is actually Richard Peter, who himself is a legend in wheelchair basketball. He was on the men's team at the same time, winning again multiple Paralympic medals for Canada.
Okay, let's bring it back to the island, back to Victoria. Who were the Victoria Dominoes?
Great basketball team in the 1940s, just loaded with stars. In fact, there's four or maybe 5 guys on that team that were inducted individually as basketball players. Norm Baker, George Porky Andrews, Art and Chuck Chapman. They were just a dominant team. Won the Canadian Championship. beat the Harlem Globetrotters and this wasn't just like a staged game. It was an actual at a time when the Globetrotters actually played. So that was quite the accomplishment. But yeah, fantastic team. Victoria was known for having great basketball teams.
Yeah, you wouldn't think a guy named Porky would necessarily belong on a Sports Hall of Fame team, but in this case, I guess he did. Another name that's familiar to many of us, Daniel Igali.
Yeah, Daniel, one of the great wrestlers in Canadian history, was a refugee from Nigeria. Had actually competed in Victoria at the Commonwealth Games for Nigeria, and fell in love with the city. And that was part of the reason why he eventually came to Canada. Competed for Canada at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, Australia, and won gold in his weight division. And just one of those classic Canadian Olympic moments where after the match, he takes a Canadian flag and lays it flat on the wrestling mat and kind of dances around it. And just, to me, that image of that still gives me goosebumps remembering that. I'm sure it does for a lot of Canadians.
And even the picture on the wall behind you, you wrote a book about that. That's Roger Bannister and the first 4-minute mile, and that happened in Vancouver.
That happened in Vancouver in 1954 at the British Empire and Commonwealth Games. Yeah. Roger Bannister and John Landy were the first two men to run some 4-minute miles, and they met for the first time racing one another in Vancouver. And they both, in what became known as the Miracle Mile, ran under 4 minutes again. And that was the biggest, not just sports story, but the biggest news story in the world on that particular day. It really put Vancouver on the world map.
So many stories to be told. You can find them all on the website for the BC Sports Hall of Fame. We're going to talk next about an initiative that the Hall of Fame is doing on Vancouver Island. We'll do that next. On Chamber Chats today, we're talking about the British Columbia Sports Hall of Fame. Michelle Kitchen is with us. She is the CEO of the Sports Hall of Fame. Jason Beck is the curator. And Tom Mayonek is the board chair for the Hall of Fame as well. Now then, there's also a Victoria Hall of Fame, Michelle. So what's the relationship between the Victoria Hall of Fame, other regional halls of fame across the province, and the BC Hall of Fame?
Well, there's well over 40 of such organizations, and we are all part of what we call the BC Sports Hall Network. We collaborate with each other, we support each other, we promote each other, and we share stories and as much information as we possibly can, including artifacts, knowledge. So it's a full-on network, very collaborative, very connected, and a lot of shared knowledge and best practices. And Tom, in a minute, will speak about a very important upcoming event where that entire network has a chance to come together and collaborate and share best practices and talk about inspiring the future and how we're going to move forward as a collective, because we're all here for the same purpose, and we're all here to honor what sport does for British Columbians and Canadians.
Yeah, so Tom, that's the event that's coming up in Victoria, correct?
Yeah, it's the Greater Victoria 2023 annual summit of the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Something, Bruce, that it's only the second time the AGM and annual summit of the BC Sports Hall has been held outside of Greater Vancouver. The first time was last year in the Okanagan in Kelowna. At Kelowna 2022, which was hosted by the Central Okanagan Sports Hall of Fame. This year, the Greater Victoria Sports Hall of Fame is co-hosting with the BC Sports Hall the annual summit happening September 14th to 16th at the Coast Hotel and at Save On Foods Memorial Center. And just to build on what Michelle was saying, this BC Sports Hall network, it's an emerging network. We're in the early days, but the response of people who are, promoting sport history, heritage, and culture, being able to work collaboratively, share information, shows to us that there's a real future in being stronger together. And the annual summit reflects that. There's no question that Victoria is not only one of the great sport hubs in British Columbia, but it's one of the great all-season training environments for high-performance Canadian athletes. And as such, it's a great sport tourism hub as well. We wanted to put the spotlight on Victoria this year, like we did on Kelowna last year, like we'll do on other parts of the province moving forward. But we're pretty excited. We'll be announcing that Tim Ryan, the former Hall of Fame broadcaster. He did NHL, he did tennis, and of course, he's best known for boxing. He was just inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He just happens to now be, after that storied career, he's now living in Victoria. He'll be our keynote speaker at the reunion at the summit, the Council of Chairs dinner on the Friday night, September 15th at the Coast Hotel. So we're very excited about the opportunity to team up with the Greater Victoria Sports Hall. We hope that this will support their efforts with their own induction happening October 28th. Later on this year, and it's just the beginning of really trying to take this community of people who care about sport history as something that inspires the next generation of British Columbians, take that network to the next level by co-hosting things like the annual summit.
Yeah, when you take a look at inductees into the Hall of Fame, Tom, you and I have a background in media. Jim Robson is in there. My buddy Bernie Pascal is in there. And it's not all people with past careers, because one of the great sports writers in this country is Cleve Deanshaw, the Times columnist. He's still working, and he's in the Hall of Fame too, isn't he?
He absolutely is in the media category, and Jason Beck can vouch for this. Cleve Deanshaw is an absolute encyclopedia. He has covered basically more than a quarter century of Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games. Back in the day, in the 15th Commonwealth Games, he was getting his career started. But he would arguably be one of the most knowledgeable sports writers and a very deserving inductee in the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Of course, you mentioned Jim Robson, the icon, Bernie Pascal. Bernie Pascal will be involved with the Greater Victoria 2023 Annual Summit, promoting our Hero and You program in Victoria on that September 14th and 15th. He's also one of the icons from the media category. I get goosebumps just thinking about some of these names, because I associate them with the game calls. Jim Robson, of course, talking about Trevor Linden and the Canucks going on till Game 7. That's the kind of stuff that we want to put out there. We want to remind people. We want to celebrate all that stuff, and hopefully the ability for previous generations of Hall of Famers to pass on that inspiration to the next generation will come true. Just a very quick story to sort of reflect that. Pat Quinn, former president, head coach, general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, and Gino Ojek, the ever popular, beloved Gino Ojek, they're both in the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Obviously, both deceased. We lost Gino, unfortunately, last year. Gino Ojek, when he was alive, told me that one of the things that really meant so much to him is that his plaque in the Hall of Fame and our Hall of Champions is right beside that of Pat Quinn, the coach who saw a lot in Gino where others maybe before him hadn't seen it. And Gino said, "Hey, I'm so proud because every time people visit the BC Sports Hall of Fame, they'll not only see me beside Pat Quinn, but my kids will be able to come and visit. And for, even after I'm dead," he said, "they'll be able to recognize my career, and nobody will ever be able to take that away from him." And certainly that's part of the responsibility and role of the BC Sports Hall of Fame, is make sure that the Pat Quinns and the Gino Ojeks of the world and all of our inductees live on forever.
Lots of island people are in there. Ken and Kathy Shields and Bruce Wilson with a UVic connection. Bob Leonard Doozy, so many names in the Hall of Fame. Silken Lauman is another Vancouver Islander. Thank you all for being here today. For everybody to get more information, check out the website for the BC Sports Hall of Fame. Michelle Kitchen is the CEO. Jason Beck is the curator. And Tom Mayonek is the board chair. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks for having us on Chamber Chats.
You bet. And as always, our thanks to Island Savings as well. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.